You give us a go, as usual.
Please.
So, good afternoon. Thank you for being here, for enduring. And we now look through this session with our own colleagues into the dynamics of decision-making. We look at how leaders assume and take decisions. For myself, I will not be exhaustive. I will only highlight some sketchy methods and simple questions that leaders normally observe when we talk about decision making. I will not refer to famous, illustrious past leaders, but I will look into the normal practice in leadership development. Now, as you have seen on the chart here, there is a nautical chart. The nautical chart of the coast of Dubrovnik, the beautiful Dalmatian coast. And why is that? This is because it evokes in my mind the essence of leadership in one simple analogy. The analogy of a good captain that is able to set the course and steer his vessel according to good seamanship rules. Seamanship has been defined as knowledge of various skills required to operate a boat. At the heart of seamanship is navigation. Let me tell you the definition of Charles Frederick Chapman, 1915, from the New York Yacht Club. Navigation is the science and art of directing the movement of a vessel from one point to another in a safe and efficient manner. A good navigator, as we all know, constantly thinks strategically, tactically, and operationally. The same applies, in my mind, and experience that we have, to an effective leader. When we talk about strategically, it means that a leader has a mission, has an overall objective, has a vision, but also tactically knows what and how to do things, or how things should be done. But also look into the implementation phase. So these three elements, operationality, this implementation phase, is also relevant. A true leader should have a comprehensive vision. These three functions should not be disjoint if we're talking about effective leadership. Again, going through this definition that I think is, at least in my mind, is illuminating, I think it's important to think about basic navigation as a cornerstone of any good skipper. Constant awareness of weather and boat conditions, along with a quick plan, should anything impact the safety of the yacht or her crew, are paramount. The key to a well-rounded command of the vessel is to utilize all information means, all sources of information available, but not relying on a single source. And to maintain, obviously, a vigilant awareness of constantly changing situation, conditions of the crew, of the sea, of the surroundings. Again, this good captain, as we know, takes responsibility for the effect of his or her action on the crew, on the passengers, on the environment, and on the property itself, the vessel, and whatever impacts on that. So the same applies to the effective leader, to the ethical leader that we are trying to depict until now. That is our reference, who do recognize the responsibility principle as a necessary ingredient of managing for stakeholders, whether these stakeholders are customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and citizens. We will come back to this analogy later on because we have a little exercise that I hope will be interesting and uplifting for all of us and for the people that are kindly listening to us online. So I will move on with the PowerPoint. Fine. Now, how do leaders make effective decisions? How do leaders arrive to this mechanism of decision making? This is the next question. Leaders, as we saw, are gifted individuals. But could also be institutions, not necessarily individuals. Could be leading groups, corporations, philanthropists, humanists, scientists, tycoons, religious leaders, heads of states, of course, politicians, rebel group leaders, investment bankers, artists, military commanders, writers, and all those who work for the improvement of humanity and make their mark on history. And they have one exercise in common: strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is an exercise. This morning we were talking about the hygiene of the mind. Well, strategic thinking is part of the hygiene of the mind. I can't say it's everything about it, but it's part of that. How a gymnast stretches and flexes his own or her own muscles, and so a leader adopts strategic thinking, has her own routine. Now, what this strategic thinking that we have here, how is it composed? What does it comprise? First of all, a systemic perspective. We discussed about systemic perspective for a while. What does it include? It includes knowledge, ability to weigh different options, sometimes consider conflicting, different information, and hear the voice of the reason. That can be the collective voice of the reason or his own judgment, or her own judgment that is made on the occasion. Second is strategic intent. That is the sense of direction to achieve a determined goal. Third, an open mind in front of changing circumstances and scenarios. Yesterday evening we were quoting musician Frank Zappa, who said that a human mind is like a parachute. It works only when it's open. Obviously, it doesn't work. And I think that the importance of maintaining an open mind for a leader is essential. The ability to contextualize in time and space, the importance of institutional memory, to maintain, to metabolize also information according to previous experiences that a leader may have gone through. So the lessons learned, the historical context, the ability to recognize patterns and making different analogies. Finally, I think the last point, and what if? And what if? This is particularly important because it's the ability to pose, to formulate hypotheses, to create different scenarios in his own, her own mind. Here, what are the qualities that are required? Obviously, imagination, foresight. We can talk also of lateral thinking. This is also important because if you are only focused on one particular aspect, you lose sense of the objective. So there are many things that contribute to this particular aspect of strategic thinking is what if. This is probably the most delicate element, but it's really what indicates the compass, the sense of direction, because again, the situations change completely and all the time. Now, let's see another important point of how decision-making happens. There is a phase that normally precedes, that predates decision-making. And this is, again, is the normal approach that is used in enterprises, in the business sector. But it also applies to institutional settings, and we'll see, I'll give you an example later on, and applies to non-governmental organizations, to the corporate world, to the political world in general. Now, the strategic planning is fundamental in order to arrive to the strategic decision-making. Strategic planning is, as I said, applied by organization as an organizational management tool. It is used to assess and adjust the organization's direction in response to a changing environment. It is a process. It is a process involving the core of an organization. As a tool, it is used to clearly define the organization's purpose and focus, to establish realistic goals and objectives consistent with the mission, objectives, and outcomes that we have in mind. And to expand also the sense of ownership, this is also very important, it's used especially in the corporate world, to expand the sense of ownership, the team-building spirit, and to contribute to proper communication of goals, objectives, outcomes, and also to clarify performance, especially for new management. Now, we can see what are the essential points of strategic planning: obtaining information, identifying key issues, committing to a course of action, considering alternatives based on facts, resources, constraints, values, logical assumptions. Now, strategic decision-making that is directly correlated and is normally exercised by corporate organizational leaders. These are the most important elements that comprise the strategic decision-making: comparing data on policy and operational effectiveness, establishing goals and requirements, predicting cause and effect from a base of information. Now, it happens that in many situations, in reality, strategic planning is not adopted at all, and we go directly to strategic decision-making. I'm not saying that one is wrong, the other one is right. Let's say that in order to have a strategic planning functioning, it should focus on issues, should not be focused on isolated aspects of management or decision-making, should not relate to production, to marketing, to units aspect, but should have an overall objective that is based on particular issues, decisions that have to be taken, whether we are going to outsource our production, whether we are opening a new plant, whether we are engaging in a new process. This has to be part of the strategic planning in order to inform correctly the strategic decision-making process. So this is a bit the two elements that should, in a way, come together in order to have a sound decision-making that is, again, informed by the strategic thinking that I was describing before. Now, reflecting on strategic thinking, I wanted to give you an example of a statement that comes from the International Labour Organization, not a recent one, we can read it aloud, but that contains some keywords that you will recognize in what we have just said. This is 2006-2009 ILO Strategic Policy Framework, a reference document that informs also decision-making, but also budgeting and operational aspects of the organization itself. The ILO must push ahead decisively with measured ambition, aware of the means at its disposal. Today, it does not have the resources to do everything its constituents request. In the face of growing demand, the ILO needs to set priorities, concentrate its efforts, avoid dispersal, and produce quality products based on its wide-ranging mandate. If it advances too slowly when globalization is moving forwards by leaps and bounds, it will miss the chance to make a contribution many see of critical importance. It must act with limited means. We need strategic thinking. I think that this is a good example that applies now to international organizations. As again, this statement is a bit dated, but I think it could be applied even nowadays, even today. Things have not changed that radically. It means also that you have to maintain your focus in terms of your critical objective, those critical areas that are of paramount importance for an organization, where you have to concentrate your resources. So again, this is an example of strategic thinking and also a memento that strategic thinking has to be adopted if you want to advance in the right direction. Now, what are the questions? Questions for decision making, and I think this is valid for many organizations and for any decision maker. These are very simple questions that we could add many others, but certainly, first of all, a decision maker has to think about what has to be decided. It's not such an easy question in reality. I mean, what do I have to decide about? What is the issue? So, first of all, you have to frame that. I mean, it's essential to come to a decision. Nobody is happy if with non-decisions. You know, decisions are important, so you have to be focused on what is your main objective. What are the options? So again, what is my strategic planning offering? What are the various options? What are the advantages and disadvantages of each option? And obviously, what is the best option? What needs to be done, finally, to implement the best option that we have in this given time? So this is, as Winston was saying this morning, in my views, a basic architecture of decision making. These few questions somehow correspond to this basic architecture. Let's move on and see how do leaders influence people. Again, we have quoted Albert Einstein many times, but I think that being a founding father of the World Academy, it's good to reiterate his not only his work, but his legacy. So he said, we should take care not to make the intellect our God. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but no personality. It cannot lead, it can only serve. So, in other words, effective leadership requires the willingness and ability to draw upon our head, our intellect, our cognitive intelligence, but also our heart. This, in my views, is what Einstein wanted to tell us. Is obviously a precursor of what was later on defined by Goleman, Daniel Goleman, as emotional intelligence. So, emotional intelligence is obviously something that comes in to complete what is our cognitive intelligence. And gifted leadership, of course, where feelings and thoughts come together. We have discussed about the importance of emotions and therefore emotional leadership. Emotions are contagious. The mental posture of a leader is a determining factor, the open mind we were discussing about. This helps us to also exercise and exert influence. The task of leadership that comes together with the decision-making processes is setting direction first and foremost, creating and maintaining commitment, and facing adaptive challenges. And the question that comes to my mind is, are we talking of being a leader, or becoming a leader, or serving as a leader? In my views, the answer is yes, becoming a leader, yes, being a leader, but not necessarily serving occasionally as a leader. The moment that someone grows into and has a sense of self-awareness of what is his sphere of influence, how his influence is exerted, the individual concerned remains, or the organization concerned, remain a leader in that particular area until it has the potential to do so. So, in a way, what I want to say is that you cannot step down from being a leader. The moment that you're a leader, it's a leader that has a lifetime kind of duty to serve until leadership is required. The fundamental task of leaders is, as we said, to create resonance, to propagate those good vibrations that inspire others in a positive emotional direction. So the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and the feelings of others, for motivating ourselves and for managing emotions in ourselves and in our relations, are the emotional intelligence that Daniel Goleman was defining, that I think we normally apply. Now, when we talk about the leadership styles, and perhaps before going into that, we already have 25 minutes, so I will have to shorten because I would like to have this exercise. Yes. I think that this goes already beyond a bit what was requested by me, that is the decision-making process. But I think this could remain as for posterity, let's say, in terms of how the leadership emotional competencies influence our thinking. There are 4 areas: self-management, social awareness, relationship management, and self-awareness, that all play an important role. Again, I will not enter into the details of that because we do not have much time, but since we have touched upon this morning about leadership styles that have, again, are directly correlated to the decision-making, let me show some of the mostly recognized leadership style that leaders adopt. Certainly, visionary for us is particularly important. Inspirational, empathic, transparent. Coaching, so a leader that is supportive, that is self-aware, that is compassionate. Affiliative, that promotes teamwork, that also is able to anticipate needs and to resolve conflict, so conflict management and a conflict manager. Democratic, that is empathic, that is influencing, that manages to reconcile opposites, as we said this morning. And I would add ethical. Ethical is of fundamental importance because of the elements of trust, of respect, of integrity, of honesty, of fairness that are all encapsulated in this word ethical. Again, has nothing to do with religion, has nothing to do with spirituality, is a matter of being honest, is a matter of being inspirational through your own behavior in a certain environment. So no matter what style an effective leader has, normally combines 2 things, and I just want to conclude with that. A strategic aerial view, the aerial view, what is, taking cognizance of a situation from the top, but also the hands-on and problem-solving attitude. These 2 approaches cannot be disjoint in an effective leader, because if you are disjoint from operational aspects, you lose the credibility, you lose the sense of mission itself. So, in my views, an effective leader should not have concentrate only on the aerial view, should also have a problem-solving attitude. Final word on the new paradigm, because I think it's maybe important to think about what are the elements that should strengthen in future, the ability of a leader to deal with complex situations, to operate across cultural boundaries. I think we have discussed that. This will be and will become an essential element of an effective leadership. To predict cross-cultural changes and transformation, again, is anticipation of situation, but to think about that. To envision upscale prevention rather than responses ahead of major crises. We talked about resilience, and resilience is a very important part of that. Resilience is bouncing back, but is also think about helping others to be equipped at the national level, at the local level, to restore a minimum that helps them to be viable, to recreate a normal life in the aftermath of major crises. And finally, I want to say also to decide quickly and generate consensus. Decisions have to be taken. I repeat the point I made before. Nobody's happy with non-decisions. You want to arrive to a point, you have, as a leader, to take a decision. And obviously aiming at consensus. This concludes the presentation. If I have time, and I would like, before we enter the panel discussion, I would like to distribute this exercise that brings us back to the beginning of my presentation, is the navigation chart. Now, I would like to invite people that are following us on remotely to also make use of the handout that will be showed to them by our facilitators. The exercise that I would like you to concentrate on is very simple. I'll read it to you as these charts come on the screen. Now, sorry, I wanted to show the chart in full, but probably we are not in the right mode. I mean, to show the full chart. But you have it. Let's say it's very simple. You are a captain, a licensed and experienced captain of a very nice 55 feet, 60 meters vessel. And this boat has been chartered in Dubrovnik by a group of friends, including a top executive with his family. Now, you have checked the boat, and the boat satisfied all your requirements before embarking. You drew your navigation course from Dubrovnik with the destination, the island of Portugal. The weather is good. The meteo forecast is also favorable. Sea conditions are perfect with a light northerly wind. As you pass the island of Midget, you see a cumulus of clouds, and then the wind picks up to 30 knots. This is the prelude to a storm. The boat is now tilting. You have reefed your sails, you have reduced the sail area, but the crew on board is in a state of agitation and discomfort. Now, what to do? What decisions to take? I would like to invite you to reflect on that, and also panelists, on this simple, very simple scenario, but that perhaps could help us and could help those who are, again, listening to us remotely to think it through. We can go directly to the panel discussion.
And at the end, you can come back.
And in the end, we can come back and summarize. But I would invite speakers also to take into account our short scenario in order of deciding how a decision is taken.
Actually, I have a presentation which directly relates to this.
Very well.
So maybe that
we will take it up as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Donato. That was really very comprehensive and very interesting. And while we're all thinking about what we're going to do with the boat, obviously you're a sailor, so your example is excellent. I was kind of sorry that we didn't have more time to go through the last slides you had, where you had self-awareness, self-management. What were the other two?
But we'll come back to that as a conclusion eventually.
Because actually it ties into what I wanted to emphasize also. There is a tendency to think about decision-making as if we've got to get the right answer, as if there's a right thing to be done out there, and we should know which door to go through. Something like, as if the reality is objective to us, and we need to figure out which is the right path. What I'd like to focus on is that the key to a successful decision is not just getting the objective part of it as good as possible, but of seeing how that relates subjectively to the people who are taking that decision and the people who are involved in it. And I think you alluded to it in different language when you talked about there's the intellectual and the emotional, the mind and the heart. But I'm going to use the words objective and subjective. Is taking a right decision a question of assessing the objective situation correctly? Or I would argue here that it's a question of finding the right assessing the entire situation, of which reality is partly objective and partly subjective. And in order to do that, I refer to something in my work that I call a complete act. For an act to be complete means for it to lead to the greatest success, the greatest possible results. And there are certain qualities, subjective psychological qualities, for a complete act to be fully successful. One is we have to have the necessary knowledge. The other is there must be an unwavering decision and determination. I think perhaps it was Alexander who yesterday morning talked about the lion and the sheep. Was that the group of lions led by a sheep, meaning somebody who's half-hearted and hesitant about what they're doing. That never, in my experience, leads to full results. Whereas if there's a determination, a full determination, even people who take the quote wrong decision objectively can make it turn right. I have we use a very simple, simplistic model to describe this. This is a 4-quadrant model, and simply put, in quadrant 1, the person has all the knowledge they need of the external circumstances, and they have all the attitudes subjectively, all the determination, the aspiration, the courage, and the positive attitudes necessary internally to succeed. Quadrant 4 is the opposite. We neither know what we're doing externally, nor do we have the will or determination or conviction internally. And 2 and 3 are in between that. In a summary way, when both external and internal, objective and subjective, are fully positive, the decision always succeeds. When they're both negative, it always fails. The interim cases are interesting, because when the quadrant 3, the external conditions are all favorable. You have other people willing and eager, maybe there's money available for investment, you have an eager customer, whatever it may be. But inwardly you don't have the determination. What normally happens is, initially everything goes smoothly. Everybody jumps in and it looks like it's going to be a great success, and eventually it peters out and it ends up failing. Whereas in quadrant 2, you've got the inner determination, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the resources, you don't have the organizational capabilities. The start is very difficult. There's a struggle all the way, but eventually, because of the inner determination, it ends up moving to quadrant 1 and becomes a success. Winston, and I'm going to stop with this, but Winston cited the example this morning about Winston Churchill in the Battle of Britain, when the government finally made Winston the prime minister because nobody else had the determination or the courage or knew what to do in these situations. And his first act, he got on the radio and he went into Parliament and he announced what England was going to do. Looking at the objective external situation, there was simply no hope that Britain could survive for more than a couple of months. In fact, the German military was very clear. Hitler was very clear. Within 2 or 3 months, Britain will surrender and the war will effectively be at an end. Whereas, as we know, within 6 months, Germany had to withdraw from the Battle of Britain, and it was really a turning point. Churchill did not go to Parliament and say, what should we do? He didn't say, let's call for a referendum and ask the people what they should do. He said, we will never surrender. We will fight on the seas, we'll fight on the rooftops, we'll fight everywhere, and he was very eloquent about it, but we simply will never surrender. And that was clearly his decision and his determination against external conditions which were extremely negative against him. And that's what I was trying to communicate through this model, that the subjective factors in decision making, I believe, are more important than the object. Obviously, you want both. You want the right external condition. You want to understand the external conditions and do the right thing. but do it with the total conviction. But if anything is lacking, better there's something lacking externally than something internally. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. This is excellent. I mean, this also is a simple model. I mean, that it's easy to be understood and to be remembered. I think this is also important because sometimes to explain concepts you need also not too complex scenarios. But in any case, we have some time. First of all, Winston and Bojo. I would appreciate if you can.
We'll try to be as good as we can.
Yeah, but also, I mean, if you're kind enough to refer to this exercise that we have given in terms of how would you take a simple decision like that one or a complex decision?
I figured it out. I'm going to consult the crew. Well, let me just say this. I've always agonized about one thing with regard to Churchill's will never surrender. And that was, I don't think he knew how weak his own crowd really was. And he knew that he might have used slightly different language. Let me just try to, these both presentations were so extraordinarily insightful and comprehensive that I'm trying to figure out whether I have anything left. Let me just start with my understanding, at least, is that when we're talking about leadership, we are really talking about power. And power is an outcome of social relations, whether it's global or local or at the village level or in the family. And so the simple point about those processes specialized to power is that power is expressed by decision making, which invariably brings in the human element and all the complexities that we've heard of. Now, fundamentally, at whatever level we're talking about, the exercise of power is the exercise of choice. And the exercise of choice is the exercise of the allocation of values, things people want or desire or need. And so the question that we would obviously have to look at is, when we abstract that more broadly, is that decision making has an obvious public sector and an obvious private sector. And normally we make the judgment that decision making from the public sector is meant to vindicate or advance the public interest. It's not absolutely clear that the decision making allocated to the private sector is not an allocation to special interests rather than the common interests, and that's a tension that's important. And it's important for the following reason. Both implicate values as preferred outcomes, but one is more confined than the other. Now today we see clusters of interest groups seeking to influence decision making, including governmental decision making. Politically, interests who are apprehensive about the concentration of power in the government subscribe to the idea that the government that governs least is the government that governs best. But our problem then is, what do you do with the rest of the power? It doesn't wither away, it goes somewhere else, and if the government has some measure of responsibility, transparency, and accountability, where the power goes to may not carry the same elements of restraint. And so, to reduce the power of government doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't being transferred somewhere else where there's less accountability, less concern for the public interest. In fact, it might end up as a diminishing of the public interest. So they let us say that we have problems with the allocation of power to the private sector. Not that there should be, but the question is ultimately going to be, In the private sector, there are special needs. Corporate privacy is necessary for competitiveness. Well, then the problem is how responsible, how accountable, how transparent is the decision-making from that sector of the community. And so we generally see the public sector as institutionalized, and the form of institutionalization is usually the constitutional system or the fundamentals of the constitutional system. But in the private sector, it's disorganized. And so the question of whether we have some ways of constituting power more rationally in complex organizations, whether they be intergovernmental or multinational or whatever, remains a problem to be resolved. In a nutshell, there is something called the Declaration which the UN put out of ethics relating to transnational corporations. But none of them are interested in that. So can you have an entity wielding a huge amount of power but making it pretty clear that it is absolutely uninterested in ethics? Can that be feasible in this day and age? And that is a decision-making challenge. And so I wanted to just add that our discussions have not touched on the problem of managing power in constitutional type ways. And I don't mean the formal governmental constitution. I mean constituting power in ways that are more accountable at all levels of society. My colleague, who's now dead, wrote a famous article called The Constitution of a Small Group. And this was NASA trying to figure out how people live in isolation and so on. And yes, there were problems. There was a black guy there, they were picking on him, but others moderated that. And what emerged from this was an internal structure organically of constitutional making and decision-making competencies. So we haven't reached out sufficiently, in my opinion, so that the ideals of empathy, good governance, responsibility, spread out not just to the corporations, but spread out as a social norm. Thank you.
Thank you, Winston, very much. We will get back to some of the points that you have raised, but in particular, I think it's worth mentioning the relations that you have highlighted in the private sector and the importance of corporations and how corporations can affect environments and therefore in critical situations in particular and in countries in crisis and the importance of applying a do no harm principle, at the same time also creating job opportunities, employment opportunities, in an ethical way. So could I ask Bojo to please continue along the same question?
If I'm responsible for that fault, and if I'm faced with that unpleasant weather conditions, then I would decide to stop on island of Mljet. The reason is simple. I'm responsible, so I'm ready to be faced with all possible consequences. And what consequences could be? That chief executive, who is one of the passengers, is going to be extremely dissatisfied because he couldn't come in time to play his golf party. It seems to me that I would take responsibility, and if he or she is interested to get additional explanation, I would say, well, there is common interest to make top executives safe for the company, for the sake of company and company's future. And private motive could be maybe he or she will remember that I made the correct decision. Concerning that decisiveness, which was expressed by words, "We will never surrender." The same message was possible to hear from the opposite side of Europe, from the eastern part of Europe. "We will never surrender, and you soldiers, if you even think the possibility of surrender, we will kill you." But basically, the message was, Stalin's message was the same. We will never surrender. But the means by using of which he accomplished that goal were completely different. His means were terror and fear, and Churchill's means were personal example and decisiveness, readiness to be faced with whatever possible outcome of that decision. So that's the basic difference, and the difference is in the system. Churchill was operated inside democratic system, and Stalin was operating inside totalitarian system. And finally, I would like to give one example of decision making. Political decision making. There was a strategic goal for Croatia, EU membership, and all relevant political parties agreed upon that strategic goal. We have to become an EU member state. One of preconditions for achieving that goal was cooperation with the Hague Tribunal. And there was general consensus. We will cooperate with the Hague Tribunal. Then, prosecutor issued an order to arrest one of the most famous army generals. He was national hero. Government that was acting at that time decided to extradite him, but government couldn't arrest him. Leading opposition party organized a big protest, massive protest, and they explicitly said, "We will never extradite our generals." Well, time has passed. There were elections, democratic elections in Croatia. Opposition won the elections, and one of the first decisions made by the same leader who was threatening by organizing coup d'etat against the acting government was arresting and transferring that famous general to Hague Tribunal. So they achieved strategic goal. I mean, they made a step in that direction, but they acted explicitly against promises they gave to their voters. So these are sometimes absurd situations in which leaders have to act. And I think that they made, from strategic point of view, correct and necessary decisions.
Thank you, Bojo. Thanks a lot. Your responses, in my views, were exemplary in all sense. I mean, your decision in terms of finding a safe haven for your boat was certainly correct from a navigational point of view, but for security reasons and for the other aspects that you have mentioned, they're all very relevant. But I also think that you have brought a real and historical example, recent history, of strategic challenges and strategic decisions in view of changing scenarios. Again, the fact that a leader in one moment has one particular opinion, but then changes radically his opinion because due to the Dayton Agreement and the rules of the road that were prescribed at the time, of course, extradition of criminals or suspected criminals was absolutely necessary in order also to achieve another strategic objective, that was to become member of the European Union. So this is a fact, and this is history. Could I invite people, other colleagues, to come up with observation, comments? Yes, Antoine?
Thank you very much, all of you, for your presentation and insights. Personally, I have been in a finance position for a large multinational, and it was transnational or an investment pretty large. And I have never been in a position where there was a yes and no easy answer based on facts and figures. This is always so much more complex because there were political issues, currency issues, and the leaders that I have been in contact with, they were capable of having intuition. And intuition, for me, has two aspects. One is based on memory, based on the past, based on experience, which means the past allows intuition to go from one direction or another. But I shall say the best of the leaders I've worked for, they were capable of really thinking something new, something absolutely not tangible, not explicable. So my question is there, if intuition can come from somewhere else than the past and the memory, come from a source that is different from the experience of someone, how can we train that? How can we develop this ability to think without the boundaries of the past? And this is my question.
It's a very deep, profound question. I don't know if anybody wants to attempt the response. Gary, or should I go first? Who wants to answer? Well, I can say to you that when I started, presenting strategic thinking, I said there are 5 essential steps, but the most important is the synthesis of intuition and creativity. Intuition is something that you cannot define in reality, and as you said, it's based also on historical memory, on experience. It's an automatic reflex. So it's a direct and automatic reflex that somehow cannot be controlled. Of course you can control it, because you can control it emotionally. You can control your emotions, but it's part of your acquis, as you say in French. It's part of your experience. So you cannot teach from scratch. In a sense, it's part of your education. Of course, if you believe in reincarnation, if you believe in multiple lives, you can say that there is a transmission of your know-how, of your personal know-how, to a future generation, and so on. I mean, that is also plausible. But what it's important is that, of course, everybody bases his intuition, her intuition, on something that has been experienced somehow. So it's an intuitive reflex over some experiences that are in the back of our mind. This is my response to that. So it's an element that you cannot teach. You can teach how to do it, but you cannot teach the experience itself. The experience, unfortunately, everybody has to prove on himself, herself. As you said in your presentation, experience is made of success and failures, and you also learn through your own failures. So, in a sense, the answer would be, teach me how to fail. And I don't think this is what we want. But you have to teach how to navigate, as we said, across this kind of challenges that we all experience. Again.
I respond to it because from the point of view of what I spoke a few minutes ago, because essentially we are judging a decision in retrospect according to the results. And the assumption was that the leader who took a decision based on, quote, intuition, the intuition was proved to be correct. We're using the word intuition kind of as a black box. If you operationally define it, we kind of mean, well, the objective facts did not point to this as a logical decision or a successful outcome, but he decided to do it anyway and it became a success. It means he was right. So I raised the question back, was he right because he took the right decision, or was the right decision because he was so determined to get the result? I'm sure some of you may have read the recent biography of Steve Jobs, where he talks about when Jobs was trying to develop, I think it was the iPod, the second iPod, or the iPhone, I think it was the iPod. He went to Corning Glass, which is the leading glass manufacturer in the world, and said, I want a glass that's so hard that it can't break when you drop it and can't scratch. And the CEO, who was said, well, we developed that thing 20 years ago, but it was too costly and we had problems with it. We call it Gorilla Glass. And no, I need it in 6 months and I need it in this quantity and everything. And the man said, look, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm an engineer. I'm a glass manufacturer. I know everything about it. You don't know anything. You're just a kid. And I'm telling you it's not possible. And Jobs said, and I'm telling you, if you really want to do it, you'll do it. And they did it. They decided to do it, and afterwards the guy, and of course that Gorilla Glass is selling all over the world now to everybody, for every product, because he was so determined to get it done. So I'm just kind of flagging the use. I believe that intuition exists. I'm not questioning the reality of intuition, but I'm questioning the broad-based use of the fact that other people disagreed with the decision or other people didn't see it. What is the factor that really made it a success? Was it because he had an insight that somebody didn't have, which is great if you have it, I believe they exist, or was it because he had a determination that was so great, or was it a combination of the two? I think the analysis would have to go further. You know, when Bill Gates learned that Jobs was trying to launch the iPod with the integration of music services from music publishers, he told his staff, don't worry about it, it's a waste of time. He'll never get the publishers to agree to sell their songs individually and give him control over the distribution of the songs. And after it was done, he conceded 2 years later. I don't know how he did it. I never thought he could do it, but he did it. And then Microsoft decided, now that we see the model, we've got great advantages over Apple, we'll do it and we'll do it better. And of course Sony said the same thing because they owned the music companies, they were producing the technology, they had every advantage over Apple, but they failed, both of them failed in it. So I think the analysis ultimately has to be, requires more.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for your exhaustive response. Alberto?
Exhausting.
Very good presentation, and I agree with everything that has been said now. I wondered though if one of the capacity of the effective leader is to be able to get a map that is the most accurate as possible. Meaning, here we have a cartographic map, and we know that it's there. The effective leader usually has to navigate on a map that is much more foggy and sketchy. There is really an island, and there is a port on that island, and so forth. And there is some sandbanks where actually. So one of the ways to navigate, I would say, is to have a lot of co-pilots. In other words, I would say that one quality is a question mark. In my opinion, is to encourage honest feedback. Leaders that are with followers that say always yes and never contradict the leader, navigate blindly, and so they can go, really crash in something that could be avoided if honest feedback could be avoided. Of course, I agree that the leader has then to be able to take decision, but in order to take effective decision, you have to have clear information, reliable information. So I would say that to elicit honest feedback, to elicit disagreement, and then to take responsibility of decision is part of the effectiveness.
Absolutely, I agree with your question. And then again, going back to this analogy or metaphor of our good navigator, the point is this: you have to consult your crew. You have to see. You said co-pilots, but the point is this. I mean, we did in our sketchy scenario, we didn't say who is the crew. I mean, do we have other professional members of the crew? I mean, this could have been a question to be raised. I mean, in a sense, you have to make sure that you base your decision on your assets. So this is valid for any decision maker, whether you are a captain or you are a captain of an industry or a leader in any other environment. We have Winston, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on this problem of creativity. There's a good literature on this in aesthetics. And I think the most impressive that I've read is the works of Walter Pater, who was an aesthete from Oxford. And when he wrote up on art, the written work was almost like a work of art itself. But he came closest to Freud, and this is where Freud and Jung split. Freud was much more conservative about the question of creativity and modest about it, whereas Jung was basically saying if you go deeper into the mind, there is this thing, the collective unconscious, which is a source of a great deal of creativity and so on. And that bridge has never been fully divided. Our former President Laswell worked on something that mediated between these perspectives. And what we got out of Freud was the idea that if you could get to be introspective, and if you could meditate and free association, in a sense like meditation, let anything come and go. If you had at the back of your head a problem that you were looking at, that at least in the psyche there's a deeper repository of value, of constructive value, of creative value that will emerge ultimately into the consciousness, and that is what we call creativity, if you like. Now, whether that is sort of cabin to the person or whether it's a collective unconscious, at least my mentor avoided the particular question which divided the Freudians and the Jungians.
Philip has a question or point to make.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think this topic about decision making is probably the most critical of all. If we look at any organizations or any leaders, we should really ask ourselves, what are the criteria upon which we make decisions? What is the paramount thought? What are we trying to protect or achieve? And probably the triple sustainability, to look at the social aspect, environmental aspect, and economical aspect at the same time. Interdependently is probably one of our challenges. But to make a decision based on profits, looking at costs, looking at incomes, that's fairly easy. But it displaces probably a lot of other topics. And it is not a holistic perspective. And it doesn't give the grid of thought to maybe make a decision that is bringing added value in a sustainable way for people, planet, and projects, for business and for public organizations. I think from that perspective, this topic is really something we should spend more time on. I'll make 2 more comments. I like the latter, your way to bring strategy by asking questions. If I'm not wrong, Einstein said if you would have 1 hour to solve a problem, we should spend 50 minutes asking ourselves what are the right questions to be asked. Because once you have found those questions, it takes 10 minutes to respond. So I think that's a good challenge. And if we look at today how big decision makers take decisions, I'm not sure they spend 50 minutes out of an hour to ask themselves the right questions. Well, we can ask ourselves a question too when we face a problem, whether it's now this problem of the vote. And there I would like to switch to Jerry's input. I made the same quadrant of external and internal, both in people. Before I do not understand what is driving the people's emotions or agitation or discomfort, I don't know if I can act upon it or not. The boat, if I'm the captain, I know the boat can take whatever wind and waves are there. So it is about the quadrant. Look internally, the people side, externally, the context, the boat. And I think that's moving towards an integral view. I thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's not necessarily what everybody is doing nowadays. And I think we can start to think in this integrated way. We will help everybody to make better, wiser, and more sustainable decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. Before I give you the floor in a minute, but I just want to read out a comment from Venkatesh in India. He says, a point in decision making is time. It has to be at the right time. I mean, I agree. I think we all agree. I mean, again, the cost of non-deciding is much higher than the cost of deciding in many ways. So we have to seize the moment and decide when circumstances warrant it. Yes, again, Sasha. Yes.
I was exactly in the same situation, maybe 35 years ago, but not on the sea, on our Crestollet. There was a small island, roughly 35 kilometers from the shore. I was myself captain, and I was in one hypothesis. And when we started to bring back from that island, there was extraordinary waves. And there was a decision. We were several friends. A lot of them were quite practiced. And they definitely they needed to go to the place that from where we started. And then I decided, my decision was immediately to go to nearest beach. And this, after that, they tried to explain through my type of person, because I'm choleric, as you can see. And because I'm my astrological science, Capricorn. I'm double Capricorn. Maybe it can so, possibilities.
Thank you,
So I enjoy it.
Igor, member of Parliament of Croatia, please.
Thank you so much. Just very briefly, in terms of making a decision here in legislative engagement, it seems to me that from the information that we have, this ship is very able in reaching its destination, even in the storm. It's a 55-foot ship. A captain is licensed. The ship is obviously very good. So the decision would have to be based upon what's the point of this trip. What is the idea of this trip? If the idea of this trip is that these people want to be in Portugal at certain time, something very important happening to them in their life, then I'm going to go on. But if the point, and it seems to me from the destination, if the point of this trip is that they enjoy the holiday, then the decision is going to obviously to stop in the first way and wait for them to get better. So you always have to, when making the decision, it's always very important to bear in mind what is the point of the endeavor itself, what was the basic idea that we want to achieve, and then we're able to really reach a decision that is in line with this basic idea.
Thank you, Igor. And this brings us back to questions that, these rhetorical questions that I put forward in the beginning. What has to be decided? Which options are the best ones? Again, that's why we had these guiding questions that apply, again, also in this particular instance. Any other comments or points? If not, I think we can conclude the session. There is anybody else who has an urgent need? I think we had a good interaction, and I think we found ourselves in agreement that a decision has to be made.